Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies, America's Bureau Chief of Sport Business, and I'm also the host of this weekly Sport Business Podcast. This week, we're going big on sponsorship. We've got two weighty topics on the agenda, and first up, I'll be bringing in Ben Cronin, our global sponsorship editor, and Jonathan Rest, global news reporter, to talk about why we should visit Rwanda, or at least why a raft of major sports entities on both sides of the Atlantic have sealed deals with Visit Rwanda, the country's tourism board. And next, I'll be bringing in European sponsorship editor Matthew Glendinning to discuss betting operator Betano's sponsorship campaigns over the last couple of years, including its 11th hour deal to sponsor the FIFA World Cup and how that tournament produced positive results for them, particularly in Latin America. To you, our listeners, don't forget to leave us your feedback on today's podcast in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms, and let us know if you like what you're hearing and what you'd like to know more about. Now, let's move on to our first topic for today. I'm here with Ben Cronin and Jonathan Rest, and the two of you are going to bring us up to speed with Visit Rwanda's latest campaigns, but good to see you back. We had you both on here last week. How are you doing, and what have you been up to over the past 7 days?
Hi, Catherine. Very well, thanks. So last time I spoke to you, I was on my way to the Women's World Cup final. So that was a pretty great event. I'm afraid Canada didn't win in the end, but they put up a valiant attempt. By all accounts, I think the media have reported it's the most attended women's rugby event ever. There were 81,000 people there, so it was a pretty great occasion. The thing I was struck by was just the star power of Ellie Kildunn. You often see where a lot of players get the big build-up before a showpiece event and then fail to deliver. I think the first time she touched the ball, she skinned about three people and then beat someone for pace on the outside and ran in a try. So, it was pretty striking. A really good event, really enjoyable. And sorry that Canada weren't able to win.
Well, there's always next time, and they did beat New Zealand, didn't they? John, what have you been up to?
Well, I've just spent 2 days at Twickenham, actually, for the Leaders' Conference. Ben was there as well. So we've kind of probably bored of hearing about England's triumphant victory, even as proud Englishmen. I've got a proof of concept, actually. Last weekend, while Ben was watching rugby and probably splitting the G at Twickenham, I was a 6-year-old's birthday party, exciting stuff. But proof of concept. My son got some Lego, F1 Lego, for his birthday. Do you remember we had this pod about 3 months ago where we talked about F1 moving into kind of different areas and trying to engage young fans? Well, we have a 6-year-old convert because he's now built his little kind of F1 car and he wants to watch some Formula One racing. So there you go. It works. 1 out of 1.
It does.
Correct.
Get them in early. That's the whole idea, isn't it? Great.
Exactly.
Well, let's move along. We're here to talk about Rwanda. Well, specifically the sponsorship activities of Visit Rwanda, the tourism arm of Rwanda's development board, which has been in the headlines in 2 continents this week. They've entered the U.S. sports market for the first time with 2 new deals with the NBA and NFL. And now we understand they're in talks to extend their partnership with Premier League club Arsenal. So while it's their first move in the Americas, they have already built up a significant presence in European football. Ben, why is this particular deal significant?
Yeah, well, as you say, it feels like there are a lot of moving parts to this, Catherine. As you say, it's the first time Visit Rwanda has broadened its sponsorship portfolio to include the USA. 2 US-based teams, 2 Los Angeles-based teams, the NBA's LA Clippers and the NFL's LA Rams. They've got jersey patch rights with the Clippers, and unusually they're the official coffee sponsor of the team's stadium. I'm guessing that's because there's a lot of coffee grown in Rwanda, and they want to emphasize that. There's also some socio-economic development elements to it. So they're going to be doing court refurbishments and coaching clinics in LA and also Rwanda. The deal with the Rams includes the title rights to a couple of hospitality suites at the team's SoFi Stadium. So there are a lot of components to this, lots of different teams included in it. Until now, they've confined their sponsorship efforts to Europe. They've got, as you said, the deal with Arsenal, the sleeve deal, which comes up for renewal at the end of this season. They've got a back-of-shirt deal with Atletico Madrid, and they've also got agreements with PSG. They did also do a sponsorship deal with Bayern Munich, but that got reconfigured. Bayern got a bit of heat from their fans, and then they changed it into a deal that was more about football development in Rwanda, so more about sort of young players and academies and things like that.
They're investing a lot of money in European football, and they have been doing so for the past few years, Ben. But why have fans been protesting against Visit Rwanda sports sponsorship deals in Europe, particularly?
Yeah, so most of the European clubs have been subject to scrutiny because of Rwanda's human rights record. So in addition to the Bayern deal, there was an Arsenal protest group called Gunners for Peace. And I think it was last April, they were handing out armbands to fans and encouraging them to cover up Visit Rwanda logo on their replica shirts. I think it was when they were playing Crystal Palace that month. And one of the reasons for that is the ongoing conflict between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Rwanda has been accused of backing the M23 rebel group, which has made incursions into the east of the country, resulting in thousands of deaths, the occupation of part of the country as well. I should say Rwanda has always denied its involvement with M23 and these allegations. I read a story that Arsenal fans in the Congo are ripping off their Visit Rwanda logos on their shirts if they are sponsors of the team. But there's also, whenever Rwanda plays against other teams, Real Madrid in the Champions League, for example, a lot of people in Congo are rooting for the other team. And so, yeah, there is this tension between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And an interesting development is that the DRC has now, it's almost as if they said, if you can't beat them, join them. I mean, they were at one stage telling these teams that they were accepting blood money by aligning themselves with Rwanda. But they've almost said, yeah, if you can't beat them, join them. And they've now started throwing money into sports sponsorship and hoovering up rights. So they've sponsored Barcelona, AS Monaco, AC Milan, yet to sponsor a UK team. You know, from where I'm standing, the ultimate way to troll Rwanda would be to do a sleeve deal with Tottenham. I don't know if that's going to happen, but yeah, it would certainly be an interesting development. So yeah, there are sort of geopolitical elements to this, I would say, elements about projecting soft power.
I mean, I find it extraordinary. I understand with Rwanda because tourism is a really big part of its economy. And I looked at some recent figures that last year it contributed 1.9 trillion Rwandan francs to the economy, which is about, by my calculations, about 1.3 billion. That's significant in a country of 14 million. And it makes up nearly 10% of the economy. And it's up over around 18% since the last peak in 2019. So it makes sense. And they've just staged the UCI Cycling World Championships in Kigali, and they were apparently very successful. But the Democratic Republic of Congo, there's a humanitarian crisis there. It seems extraordinary that they'd be using tourism as a draw to the Congo. Why are they doing these deals?
I think you kind of touched on it, didn't you, Ben, very brief. There is a big soft power element to this, isn't there? This isn't just sticking a tourism advert somewhere. This is putting your brand front and centre of some of the biggest football clubs, biggest sports properties in the world. You know, that Arsenal sleeve logo is seen everywhere. And I think that's the main ploy. Are they really, I'm not sure how much of a huge tourism play it is. I go to the Emirates, not as much as I used to, but I don't know many of those fans that are going to Rwanda on their summer or winter holidays, in all honesty, because they're seeing that logo every day on their children's shirts. So I think it's a big soft power play. We talked about that across multiple sports and multiple nations, whether that's hosting of events, sponsoring major tournaments. So I think that's the kind of the big play here, and then direct people to read Ben's reporting and Frank Dunn's reporting on the kind of wider sponsorship battle that's playing out between DRC and Rwanda as to why they're doing this. But yeah, that on the face of it, that looks the reason.
Yeah, from speaking to people in the industry and sponsorship agencies, there was a feeling when Frank and myself were talking to them about this, that was saying it's very hard to measure ROI on a tourism deal. How can you prove that because X number of people saw a logo on a shirt, instantly went and booked a ticket to Rwanda to go and visit the mountain gorillas? That said, Rwanda have claimed that there was a 5% uptick in tourism in 2019, the year after they struck the Arsenal deal. And there was another quote, I mean, I mentioned the mountain gorillas, there was another quote from someone from their development board, and they said that the revenue from people going to see the mountain gorillas was enough to cover all of their sports sponsorship deals. The basketball clinics and the court refurbs, as I said, they point to a sort of a socio-economic development aspect to this, two parties helping each other to sort of elevate sponsorship facilities and access to sport and fitness and health in Rwanda. And there's that broader geopolitical aspect, this proxy war that Frank talks about between Rwanda and DRC. And you look at the Arsenal deal, I mean, there's also the broader element of, at the time that one was announced originally, if you remember, the UK was planning to deport illegal immigrants to Rwanda as part of a migration and economic development deal. And when we reported on the DRC deal with AC Milan, someone mentioned to us that DRC had just been selected as a key player in Italy's artificial intelligence plan for Africa. So it's possible to conceive of these wider geopolitical elements. I mean, we don't know these for a fact, but there does seem to be a relationship building element. There's also the fact that in the Arsenal deal, I mean, Paul Kagame is president of Rwanda, is an Arsenal fan. And it also happens that the PM who scuppered the Rwanda plan, Keir Starmer, is an Arsenal fan. I'm not saying for 1 minute that the two things are connected, but it's certainly an interesting dimension to the deal. So yeah, and now they're sponsoring US teams. US was an important ally in brokering the peace deal the so-called peace deal between Rwanda and DRC. Reportedly, there is still fighting, but that was one of the wars that Donald Trump claims to have ended. And, as part of that deal, the US could potentially get access to Congo's mineral wealth. So there's a lot of moving parts in this. I'm not, again, saying that the reason Rwanda is sponsoring a US team now is a riposte to Congo's mineral deal. But there's more than just promoting tourism, I think, in some of these deals. As John says, it's projecting soft power and relationship building between countries.
Well, there are very clear political elements, obviously, as you say. Call me cynical, but I wonder if the DRC has a better place to spend its money than on European football sponsorships. But in any case, what does this mean, going back to Arsenal? What does it mean for their sleeve sponsorship? Because in the global sponsorship report that you've just released, the Visit Rwanda deal is in the top 6 sleeve deals for last season. It's not insignificant, is it?
Yeah, it's not insignificant. It's £10 million a year, isn't it?
9.1.
Yeah, 9.1. I apologize. I like to round it up. It all goes in the transfer kitty, Ben. I remember when that deal was done, everyone was kind of raving about that being kind of way above other sleeve deals at the time. That deal was due to end at the end of this coming season, but it's understood, actually, there's been some reporting this week that they're close to renewing that deal. Ben may know more on the kind of financial terms of that as and when it comes in, but there are reports that is going to be renewed, and it's going to be interesting given what Ben mentioned there about the Gunners for Peace group that were quite active around that Crystal Palace game. Interestingly, teamed up with PSG fans ahead of the Champions League semi-final at the Emirates, and there was like a small march that both sets of fans kind of went on, covering up the logos with black armbands. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of response that renewal, if it is indeed turns into a fully signed renewal contract, is going to be. But it will be lucrative because I'm assuming Arsenal probably weren't short on offers given the rise that they've had in the last couple of years. You've got to think when Visit Rwanda came on board, Arsenal were in a struggling position and now are back at the top kind of 5-6 teams in Europe. So commercially are probably quite an attractive proposition, Ben, right?
That's right. Well, when I first saw the Clippers deal announced, I thought that might mean the writing was on the wall for Arsenal and they hadn't been able to come to terms. Then I saw the LA Rams component. Rams and Arsenal obviously have a shared ownership group. Then I started to think, well, maybe this is the first part of a wider deal with both teams. If you were going to announce an Arsenal sleeve deal, it would merit a different story and you wouldn't bury it in a story with the LA Rams and the Clippers. As John said, City AM reported that they were close to a deal this morning. We haven't so far been able to substantiate that. We had heard that they tabled a pretty significant offer a few months back to retain the rights. In fact, one that would make it one of the most lucrative sleeve deals in the Premier League. But we haven't been able to determine if that had been accepted. If they do, it will likely mean that they're prepared to endure the criticism, that they can get beyond the fan protests and that they feel like they can endure that.
Ben, you mentioned one thing about the ownership group, and I want to go a little bit more into that. And I think John has something to say about this. A Kroenke portfolio that includes the Clippers, if I'm right, and of course Arsenal. And I'd like to know how common joint sponsorship deals are across the Kroenke portfolio.
Yeah, to repeat Martin's pedantry from last week, it's not the Clippers. They've got the Nuggets of their NBA team. They have the LA Rams in the NFL, Colorado Avalanche, as you know, in the NHL. And I think they've got an MLS team, Colorado Rapids, and a lacrosse team, I think, as well as, a large estate portfolio. So they are one of the biggest kind of multi-sport club owners. And earlier this year, KSE, Kroenke Sports and Entertainment, kind of launched a new division whereby they will look to sell sponsorship deals across their portfolio of teams and real estate. So Emirates Stadium, SoFi Stadium, Ben mentioned earlier. So we're not saying that this Visit Rwanda is, one of those deals as such, but I think you're going to see more common sponsors across the Kroenke investment portfolio. You've also seen recently a bit of a change at Arsenal on the board, which has involved a couple of Cronky people. Cronky people sounds like a TV show. A couple more Cronky executives joining the Arsenal board. There's much more of a hands-on involvement from Josh Kroenke, son of the owner Stan Kroenke. So I think you are going to see a lot more joint sponsorship deals there. That is what that kind of new venture is set up to do, to really give global brands more of an opportunity to scale up. So there may well be, Ben may have some kind of demonstrative examples of that already, but certainly I think Visit Rwanda can probably fall into that category now.
Yeah, they've done it to a certain extent in the past. They had a deal with a company called Ball Corporation, which is an aluminium packaging company. They did a deal in 2020, and that was to sponsor the Nuggets Stadium. It's also the Avalanche Stadium. And like a lot of stadium deals, that was about sponsoring their local team. But as part of that deal, they also did a deal with Arsenal. I mean, the Arsenal component was admittedly relatively small. I think my understanding of that deal was about 900K per annum. But it was still an example of a joined up approach and them cross-selling across different properties. I looked at our deals tracker database, and there are a few other sponsors are common to several of the teams in the portfolio. Adidas, which is Arsenal's kit supplier, has got several team deals, as does Socios, though I would imagine there's a relatively small lower tier deals. PepsiCo as well. If Visit Rwanda goes on to do a deal there, then that's going to be on a much bigger scale, I would say. You know, it is common across other ownership groups. If you think about Fenway that owns Liverpool, several teams in the US, Harris Blitzer Sports and Entertainment that's got some ownership in Crystal Palace. But it's only really suited to global brands. It has to be a brand that has a footprint in all of those different markets, you know, that can actually see viability of sponsoring a London team, a team in Denver and a team in LA, which isn't always the case.
Right. Well, I think we've pretty much covered that topic. Thank you both, gentlemen. I know we'll be back with news on Sport Business about whether Arsenal does extend that sleeve sponsorship deal with Visit Rwanda. But for the moment, great insights. Thank you both very much. And we'll be seeing you in future weeks. We're going to move on now after a short break to the second part of our podcast. We'll be right back.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest sports industry news. I'm here with Matthew Glendinning, our European sponsorship editor. Welcome back, Matthew. You're a regular on the pod now.
Yeah, that's two in a row. Let's see if we can make it a hat trick, Catherine.
2 in a row.
Yeah, I'm going to go for 3 if I can.
Go for 3. What's new with you this week? What's been on your agenda?
The only thing that was real interest, I think, for this podcast was, I think, how everyone watched the Ryder Cup in a different way. I watched it on the radio. No, I didn't watch it on the radio. I listened to it on the radio while looking at the Ryder Cup websites. As it went on, I was rooting for the Americans to come back because otherwise it was so boring. And then as they kept coming back, I was thinking, you better stop now. Bryson DeChambeau, you can stop now. And we'd quite like to win. So it's quite interesting. I'm sure that everyone felt that way. You know, they wanted it to spice up, but maybe not quite as much as it did.
I like that approach. It's sort of old school listening to the radio, but also looking at the website. It's a good combination. Well, let's get down to business. You sat down recently with Luis Iglesias Hernando, who's the chief commercial officer at Betano's parent company, Kaizen Gaming, I think it is. Now, Betano, of course, was the first global betting sponsor at Euros in 2024 and regional sponsor for Europe at the 2022 World Cup. But it was also the first to sponsor the Club World Cup with regional deals for South America and Europe. So it's interesting to get some sponsor feedback in the Club World Cup. Tell us what Luis Iglesias Hernando's take was on their success at the Club World Cup.
Yeah, Luis is a very engaging individual, first of all, and he spoke very interestingly about the whole thing. I think he's represents the first brand who's really spoken about how the Club World Cup was for them, or at least at length, or at least to Sport Business sponsorship. And he said that, well, first of all, one thing about Betano is, of course, they're a betting company, so they have unique data that other sponsors wouldn't have. They're in a very good position to gauge whether it was a success or it wasn't. He learned from his data that fans were very enthused about the competition in South America, especially Brazil. And he said that, anecdotally, the fans in South America love to think their teams are as good as the European teams and want a kind of chance to prove it. And they kind of did prove it. And Fluminense reached the semi-final, after which I understand that interest waned a bit in South America. So they weren't quite so interested in Chelsea, PSG. But in Europe also, he told me that the engagement was quite good, especially in markets where Betano operates, like the UK, Germany, Portugal, and Eastern Europe. And he did say, despite the dismissiveness of the UK media, because a lot of people were a bit snooty about the Club World Cup, saying it wasn't necessary. But with 12 European teams and 6 from South America, there were some great matchups. And I think ultimately, Betano were probably relieved that Chelsea won because the pre-tournament favourites were Real Madrid, Man City, Bayern and PSG. So they probably made a bit more money because of the result.
It was a smart move to go hard on Latin America. If you look at some of the audiences, I've recorded some of them for the Club World Cup. In Argentina, Telefe, the commercial broadcaster, recorded historic audiences for the Club World Cup, which were similar to those for Argentina games in the FIFA World Cup. And their audiences in the Club World Cup were high, not just for Boca and River matches, but also for foreign clubs that had Argentine players. And then in Brazil, there were also massive audiences, the best audiences on Globo since the 2022 World Cup. And I mean, this is astonishing. Flamengo-Chelsea drew over 22 million viewers. I mean, that's a big number. And then, of course, Fluminense in the knockout stages, the matches were up around 15 million viewers. So those are enormous audiences for these days, aren't they? And then, of course, I have to mention Kaze TV, the YouTube channel, which streamed all the matches, and they reached 17.4 unique viewers in the first round alone. And then pay TV channel Sport TV's audiences were up over 320% higher than the second place pay TV channel during that week. So they were onto a good thing, weren't they? Good wicket there with the choosing to go into
good
Latin
work
America.
by Betano. Of course, if they'd had that data in the beginning, it would have made their life a lot easier. I think before all that data you've just given me was apparent, it was a new concept, and really pricing their sponsorship wasn't easy for them. I think it was the case with all the brands involved that, how do you value this was problematic. And you have to remember that this Club World Cup had 63 matches from 32 teams, which is a rise of 7 matches. Literally, there were only 7 matches in 2023 from 7 teams. So also, Betano used a lot of data to make their decisions. So it was rather amusing talking to Luis. He said with some humour that it was a bit of a lose-lose deal, which I've never heard that before. They always talk about win-win. This was a bit of a lose-lose deal. He said he paid a little more than he wanted and FIFA got a little less than they wanted. And, they had to reach a decision somewhere. And the really weird thing is, of course, they announced the deal 2 days after the kickoff. So I'm not quite sure exactly when they signed it, probably a little before the kickoff. But they took it right to the wire. By doing that, I think Betano got the best price by taking FIFA right up to the wire.
So they were late coming to the table, but I think you mentioned that there were some other latecomers to the deal, including Jeep and Panini. So how did they get value for money?
Yeah, and it does seem weird, doesn't it? It's like, the practicalities of that seem different. And in terms of most sponsorships, people talk about long lead-ins and activations and campaigns and getting all your ducks in a row. Well, I don't think too many people are getting their ducks in a row, but I can't really speak for Jeep and Panini, but they literally came on for either the semi-final or the final. Betano definitely had a plan. I mean, they signed the deal late, but their preparations had been done early. And that's proven by the sort of amount of advertising they took on DAZN. They created a really big campaign on DAZN. They got some of the premium placements, advertising media buys, and they also had a graphic overlay on the game clock in some markets. So that was all pre-prepared to make a splashy campaign. It wasn't exclusive. There are other betting companies out there as well. And then they made the deal, and then they got the LED, which would have been valuable. And then because they did it in series, they did South America first. So and then up to the group stages, then they got the Europe rights in the group stages. So that gave them a bit more LED. So although it seems a bit like done on the hoof, they knew that they wanted to make an impact, and it was just how they did it and how much they spent that was really in question.
So have they measured the impact yet? Have they measured their ROI, given that the audiences were so high in Latin America, and so their brand awareness would have soared, wouldn't it?
I'm sure they've measured it. He's not going to tell me exactly how well they did. He said they exceeded expectations in Europe. Certainly they did well in South America, but I mean, it would be kind of madness for him to tell me how much money they made on it, because he's going to have to go back and negotiate it again with FIFA next time. And I said, well, look, you told Sport Business Sponsorship how much you made. So he's not going to tell me that, but they did well. And I think it's clearly a model that works. And it's also one that perhaps in the future he expects will get much better. Some of the big European clubs weren't there. Some of the big Mexican clubs weren't there. I think as the format gets more established, and he's also got the data from this Club World Cup to work on the next one. I'm not saying they'll necessarily get it, but certainly there'll be more to go on for the next one when that comes around.
So not really a lose-lose for them. It sounds like they did pretty well. And do you think they will continue to back club football competitions with the same energy they put into these national team competitions?
I think they will. And I think, obviously the Club World Cup isn't a year-round competition, but they are an official sponsor of the Europa League and the Conference League with UEFA. And he did tell me that has proven really good value for money. The point there is that the markets that Europa League and Conference League play in are actually strong for Betano. As I said before, Eastern Europe and Portugal and the UK and Germany, they're all good markets, and it does represent value for money. I think also quite cleverly, or luckily, last year at least, they had quite good exposure in the Champions League, where we've got Bet365, as everyone knows, as the betting operator there, betting sponsor there, in that they had front of shirt with Villa, with Sporting in Portugal and Slavia Prague. They had their cake and eat it a bit with the Champions League as well. And so I would have thought that it may be in the next cycle at least. Yeah, I've got no special insight from Betano, I have to be honest. But it could be something that they would look to upgrade to the Champions League, but they're getting value for money. And one other thing with Relevant taking over from team marketing for the next cycle, who knows, maybe there'll be more regional opportunities, and that might be right up Betano's street. And indeed, generally, I think for a very fractured global betting market, I think regional is the way to go.
Well, I'm just looking through some of the pages from our global sponsorship report, which came out a couple of weeks ago. And Betano figures very large in the report in Europa and Conference Leagues. I think it's at the top of that list. And it's one of the top 7 or so in the Premier League shirt sponsorship deals. So they're not going away anywhere soon. They're a force to be reckoned with, aren't they?
Yeah, the global sponsorship report is an immense bit of work. And yeah, Betano, one of the stars in there from a sponsorship point of view. But every sector, many sectors are very well covered, and competitions are extremely well covered. And that's something to look at if you can get hold of one.
On our website, sportbusiness.com, there's ways to subscribe and to acquire this global sponsorship report, which is something that can't be missed if you're in the sponsorship sector. Matthew, thank you very much for your wonderful contributions as usual. Great insight into Betano's sponsorship and European football sponsorship in general. And we will be having you back, I'm sure, perhaps for a three-peat next week.
So let's hope so. Let's see what I've got.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Wonderful as always. We're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back in just a minute for the final section of our podcast, where I'll be looking ahead to the coming week with Jonathan Rest. We'll be right back.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with trusted news, data, and analysis across media rights, sponsorship, and more. Explore our subscription options at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, where we're bringing you the latest news powering the global sports industry. Now, I'm here for our final section with John. He's come back to join me. And John, I know you're going to be keen to look at the feedback this week from the first On the Money financial newsletter that you've launched. And you're just about to set off for New York. What can you tell me about what's happening in your part of the world?
Yeah, I'm heading there next week for a few days, and it's kind of, I guess, tied in with On the Money. We need to be in the faces of these guys that are doing the big deals. So I'm going over there for a few days to hopefully meet with some league officials, but also some of these kind of big investors and financiers and the lawyers behind the big deals that are being done in global sport, really, but obviously mainly a lot of it being driven by US money. And interestingly, I mentioned earlier on in the pod about the Leaders Conference this week, and they had a quite heavy influence of finance talk and private equity talk. And they had Roger Goodell, the commissioner of the NFL there. And if you read the kind of editorial piece that I put on the Money this week around the valuations of the NFL, how their media rights are going up. They are talking about going early with their media rights talks. That's only going to send the fees one way. That's going to increase the value of the franchises, and that's going to increase the kind of interest in them from private equity, which as of only about a year ago are now allowed to buy stakes of up to 10% in NFL teams. There's a limited number of private equity firms are able to do that. And we've already seen a couple of these deals now being done. If you look at the likes of the Dolphins, they've had a deal most recently. The New England Patriots sold 8% and that values the team at $9 billion. The numbers are huge. As I say, the earlier they go with these TV renewals, I think their current deals are 110 billion over 11 years. That number's only going to go one way, isn't it? And therefore the value of these franchises is going to go through the roof even further, kind of softened always by the fact that in US sports you've got no relegations. For an investor, there's a big safety net there. So yeah, so that's the kind of purpose of my trip, really, is to get out there and speak to as many of those guys as possible who are going to keep the wheels greased for the next however many years.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? This surge investment, private equity investment in sport. And I was speaking to somebody recently about it, an investor here, who said that sport is just highly investable, isn't it? Like you say, it's a closed league. There's no relegation, so it offers long-term security. The hard salary cap ensures a level playing field, and it's an equitable commercial model. So, of course, the U.S., with its major leagues that are closed leagues, are really well set up for this surge in investment, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. They are now. And I mean, Roger Goodell was actually asked at Leaders, the limit is 10%. Is there plans to kind of push that? I think the NFL were the last to come to the party and have the tightest kind of controls on that. And, he said it's still very early days. It's only a year into this process, but you can expect there will be heavy pressure for these teams to take on more investment. There's certainly the interest there. So yeah, interesting time.
Well, if you're going to be in the US next week, you might still hear the reverberations from the release of the ticket prices for next year's World Cup in the US, Canada, and Mexico. There's a bit of sticker shock going on. The price for the US opener for Category 1 is a whopping $2,735, which is a bit up from I think it was $475 at the World Cup in 1994, but also more than double, nearly double the price of the Category 1. Well, no, actually, I'm looking at the final. The price for the final is over $6,000, and that is compared to $1,600 for Qatar. So I think there's going to be a lot of complaints. You'll certainly hear more about this dynamic pricing model and what they're going to expect from ticket sales for the World Cup.
Yeah, there better be a hell of a halftime show for $6,000. I don't know who Gianni's got planned to roll out, but at that price, wow.
Yeah, I think they are planning sort of NFL-style halftime shows, aren't they, at the World Cup for a novelty factor?
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the way forward. Maybe that's going to happen to the Champions League. Maybe that's what Relevant are planning, kind of some NFL, kind of make it more of a Super Bowl feel to the week rather than just turn up and leave. So a bit of jazz, bit of pizzazz.
Bring in Taylor Swift. That sounds good to me. What else are you looking at in this week coming up, or any other business? Yeah,
my any other businesses are rare. Every now and then, Martin and I like to dip into the Olympic sports world, don't we? And this week, I'm going to bring you a story from handball, the International Handball Federation, where we are now well set for a December election. There's actually going to be some challenges for the first time in a long time. So Dr. Hassan Mustafa has been president of the IHF since 2000. He's 81. I will not give the full story of Hassan Mustafa. I will let you read the positives and controversies elsewhere, because the lawyers might be listening. But yeah, he's actually going to face a contested election. So there's 3 European guys that are challenging him, and I just think that's going to be super interesting to see if he can hold on to power until he'll be 85 if he can get elected and survives the next term. So it just comes back to that idea of there just needing to be term limits at all IFs. And I know there has been a push from ASWAF through kind of governance measures, the Summer Olympic Federation umbrella body, to kind of have term limits across the board to make sure that there is fresh ideas coming in. And I'm not sure being in power for 25 years is ticking that box. So good luck to him, and good luck to the 3 challengers when it comes around to the election. But the election is being held in Cairo, which is Mr. Mustafa's hometown. So there we go.
Well, there's something to be said for continuity, I suppose. But I'm sure there's been someone older than that. I'm sure there's been someone in their 90s. We'll have to check back in our records. But looking to other things, one thing that amused me this week was comments that took place last night during a Major League Baseball broadcast. And the analyst, a certain Ben McDonald, was involved in a promo for the upcoming first match on ESPN of the NHL hockey season. And he's taking a lot of rap for his comments, because he said during the live broadcast of a Major League Baseball game, he was asked about the Florida Panthers and their chances of winning a 3rd Stanley Cup final. And he said, "Well, if you say so, good luck to them. Are you asking if I'll be watching? There's 0 chance I'll be watching." I am going to be honest with you, I will be somewhere else. And then he went on to say, as far as the hockey stuff goes, when that thing pops up on screen, I'll be honest, I didn't even know ESPN had the hockey contract. Now, ESPN is actually paying $2.8 billion for their NHL hockey deal. So interesting that he wasn't briefed beforehand on what he could or could not say. Just, it's a message to us, John. We have to be careful what we say, don't we?
Exactly. And was that the full extent of his language, or were you giving us the kind of watershed version?
That was very much the watershed version. I don't think he dropped any F-bombs on live TV, but the sentiment was there.
Good for him. At least he was honest, if that's what his feelings.
He's from Tennessee, which doesn't have a hockey team. And apparently he's never watched a hockey match in his life. Probably the wrong guy to have on a promo for the NHL.
It does have a hockey team, the Nashville Predators.
Well, maybe it was another state. I can't remember which one. But anyway, apparently he's never watched one. So there you go. But just to carry on another quick bit of trivia, or an interesting thing that happened here. Last night was the Canadian Championship, which is the FA Cup of Canada in football/soccer. For the first time ever, there were two teams from the same city playing, Vancouver Whitecaps from Major League Soccer versus Vancouver FC of the Canadian Premier League. And the Whitecaps won 4-2, which seals their path into the CONCACAF Champions Cup. But also, it was Thomas Müller, remember him? The Bayern Munich legend. It was his 30th trophy, which makes him the winningest German football player of all time. He passed Toni Kroos, who had 34, and Müller had 34 as well after winning the Bundesliga last year, but he now has 35. And on top of that, he scored a goal last night. He scored on a penalty. So well done to Thomas Müller, who's quite the star out here.
His 300th career goal, Catherine, as well, would you believe?
Yeah.
So there
another
we are.
landmark.
What a way to fin another landmark.
So he's a big star out here.
And his 30th mention on this podcast as well. So I hope he subscribes, because he gets a lot of love.
I hope he does. Between Thomas Müller and Kaze TV, they're the two that we mention the most. So absolutely. I think that's it for this week. John, thank you very much. As usual, you always add a lot to the podcast, and we'll have you back either next week or the week after with more cutting-edge news in the sport business industry. Thanks very much, and we will be back next week. To our listeners, if you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you know where to go. Take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. And as always, if you enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout, you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. Please don't forget to share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast and Spotify platforms. And watch for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, and for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.